The First Punic War had ended not with a Carthaginian triumph, but with humiliation. In 241 BC, Carthage was forced to sue for peace after 2 decades of war with Rome. Sicily was lost. A staggering indemnity had to be paid. Carthage's pride, its navy, its generals, its global prestige, was shattered. Into these ashes walked a man who had not accepted defeat, Hamilcar Barca. He was not born of the ruling elite. He was no suffete. He did not command Carthage from its marble halls, but from the saddle and the sword. In the dying years of the war, he had been entrusted with command in Sicily. Not to win, but to delay, to protect Carthaginian interests until the inevitable treaty. But Hamilcar had fought with fire. For 6 years, he had turned Mount Eryx into a fortress and a flame. His name burned in Roman reports as a demon in human form, slippery, brilliant, tireless. Though the war was lost, Hamilcar returned not as a broken man, but as one with a vendetta. And Carthage, bloodied and leaderless, needed a man with fire in his veins. What followed was not peace. As Carthage tried to recover, it failed to pay its mercenaries, thousands of veterans who had bled for a war they hadn't lost. Promises broken, payments delayed, and then rebellion. The Mercenary War, also called the Truceless War, broke out in 240 BC and dragged Carthage to the brink. What started as a labor dispute became an existential threat. The rebels seized cities, executed Carthaginian commanders, slaughtered civilians, and at the darkest hour, Hamilcar was called. At first, the Senate hesitated. He was popular, dangerous, but necessity silenced caution. Given command, Hamilcar did not negotiate. He crushed. He maneuvered with surgical brutality, encircling armies, executing leaders, and refusing surrender. At the Battle of the Soar, he annihilated the rebel army. At Tunis, he unleashed horrors to break their morale. In less than 3 years, the rebellion was dead. Hamilcar had saved Carthage, not with politics, but with steel. And now, he held power, not by election, but by right of conquest. But Hamilcar had not forgotten Rome, he had not forgiven, and he had not surrendered his vision. Carthage, he believed, had lost because it fought from weakness, not strength. So he turned his eyes west, to Iberia. Rich in silver, soldiers, and opportunity, the Iberian Peninsula had long been on Carthage's fringe. But now, Hamilcar dreamed of empire. In 237 BC, he sailed with his army, not as an invader, but as a redeemer. He carved a path through tribal lands, forming alliances and taking hostages. Cities fell or bent the knee, fortresses rose, and from Iberia, silver poured back into Carthage, refilling its coffers. With this wealth, Hamilcar built something far more dangerous than a new province. He built a war machine. Tens of thousands of Iberians trained in his armies. North African cavalry, seasoned Punic officers, and mercenaries of every stripe followed him. But most importantly, he built something else. Legacy. He brought with him his young son, Hannibal. At the age of 9, Hannibal is said to have sworn a sacred oath before the gods to never be a friend of Rome. It was not just an empire Hamilcar was forging, it was a vendetta passed through blood. Back in Carthage, Hamilcar's growing power unnerved the elites. Though the silver flowed and the army grew, the Senate feared the rise of a warlord beyond its control. But Hamilcar played the game. He married his daughters into powerful families, including to Hasdrubal the Fair, a gifted commander who would become his political ally and successor. Through charisma, success, and the shadow of his victories, Hamilcar kept his enemies at bay. But he knew that time was limited. Carthage needed a leader who could finish what he had begun. Iberia was no longer a colony, it was a rival capital. New Carthage, his fortified city, became the nexus of Carthaginian strength in the west. Here the Barca family ruled as kings in all but name, and Rome watched uneasily as Carthage, thought broken, began to rise again, not with fleets but with legions of hardened men under a general who had sworn revenge. Hamilcar's end came not on the battlefield against Rome, but during a campaign against the Vetones, a fierce Iberian tribe. Around 228 BC, while crossing a river or perhaps ambushed in mountain terrain, Hamilcar was killed. Some say he drowned, others say he was betrayed. His body was never found. But what he left behind was far more enduring than any grave. In Iberia, his sons Hannibal, Hasdrubal and Mago were already being groomed for war. His dynasty, the Barca name, had become a symbol of Carthaginian strength, ambition and vengeance. In death, Hamilcar became myth. A ghost whispered in his sons' ears, a blueprint etched into their bones. And in Rome, senators whispered the name Barca with dread, for they knew that though the warlord was dead, his war had only just begun. After Hamilcar's death, command in Iberia passed not to his son, still too young, but to his son-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair. Unlike Hamilcar, Hasdrubal was no hammer of war. He was a statesman, a diplomat, a master of alliances. But he understood that war was only one path to empire, and often not the best one. Where Hamilcar had conquered by force, Hasdrubal expanded by persuasion. He offered Iberian tribes positions, profits, protection. He founded Quart Hadasht, New Carthage, in 227 BC, a city built to rival Carthage itself, complete with harbors, temples and palaces. It became the beating heart of the Barcid Empire. Under his rule, Carthage's Iberian territories solidified. Silver mines poured wealth into Punic coffers. Mercenaries were trained in vast numbers. Rome, nervous, negotiated a treaty. The Ebro River would be the limit of Carthaginian expansion. Hasdrubal agreed for now, but even in peace, he prepared for war. Then, in 221 BC, he was assassinated by a disgruntled Celt. Some said it was personal. Others whispered Roman coin was involved. But his death did not halt the empire. For now, the time of Hannibal had come. At 26, Hannibal Barca assumed command of the Iberian army. But this was no ordinary young general. Raised in military camps, hardened by campaigns and haunted by his father's oath, Hannibal had been trained from childhood for this moment. He was charismatic, fluent in Punic, Greek and Iberian, and beloved by his troops. His appointment was confirmed not in Carthage but by the soldiers themselves. He was Dux Electus, a general by acclamation. Immediately he set out to expand Carthage's power, seizing territory north of the Ebro and besieging hostile tribes. His greatest test came at Saguntum, a city allied to Rome yet south of the Ebro. Hannibal's siege was methodical, ruthless, brilliant. The city fell after months of resistance. Rome responded not with negotiation, but with declarations of war. In 218 BC, the Second Punic War began. But Hannibal would not wait to be attacked. He took the war to Rome. The story of Hannibal's march through Iberia, over the Pyrenees, and across the Alps is legend. With a multinational army, Libyans, Numidians, Gauls, and Iberians, he crossed rivers, hostile tribes, and freezing mountains. Elephants trampled snow. Men died by the thousands. But by sheer will, deception, and relentless drive, Hannibal led his army into Italy. It was a feat Rome thought impossible. The son of Hamilcar had fulfilled his inheritance, not with defense, but with the boldest invasion in history. The war that followed would last for 17 years, but in those first months, it was not just Rome that trembled, it was the known world. Throughout the early years of the war, Hannibal's strategies really bore the stamp of his father. Use the enemy's arrogance against them, exploit terrain, win hearts where possible, destroy where not. At the Trebia River, he lured the Romans into a trap. At Lake Trasimene, he ambushed an entire Roman army in the mist. And at Cannae, in 216 BC, he executed the greatest battlefield encirclement in recorded history. 50,000 Romans lay dead. Each victory was not just tactical, it was psychological. Hannibal was not merely fighting Rome, he was avenging Carthage's past. And behind every movement, there loomed the ghost of Hamilcar, the firebrand who had taught his son that peace with Rome was illusion. But Carthage was not Hamilcar's to command anymore. The Senate, cautious and fractious, refused to send Hannibal the reinforcements he needed. In Iberia, his brothers Hasdrubal and Mago fought to hold the Barcid territories. Slowly, Rome adapted. Scipio Africanus rose from the ashes of defeat to take the fight back to Iberia. The Barcid Empire began to crack. Hasdrubal was killed at the Battle of the Metaurus. Mago was wounded in Liguria and died en route home. Hannibal, recalled to defend Carthage, was finally defeated at Zama in 202 BC. The dynasty that had nearly broken Rome was shattered, but its legend endured. Hamilcar, in death, had reshaped the destiny of Carthage. He had taken a nation in ruins and forged an empire. His sons carried that vision into the heart of Italy, and though they failed, they left a mark so deep that Roman historians wrote of them with awe, respect, and fear. In the ashes of defeat, Hamilcar had lit a fire that burned for a generation. Carthage would never be the same, nor would Rome. This is the story of Hamilcar Barca, the man who turned defeat into empire and fathered a legend. As we continue through the fall and flame, tracing the rise and ruin of Carthage, subscribe to follow each chapter in this epic saga. Like, share, and tell us, was Hamilcar Carthage's savior or the architect of its final doom?